I was 11 years old when I first started shooting arrows at the sun. My parents brought my sister and my brother and I each a bow and arrow for Christmas. And I'm not really sure what they were thinking. But I heard my aunt say that we each got one just to keep it a fair fight. These were no ordinary bow and arrows, though. They were imported from China. They were exotic. And this was back when made in China really meant something. My sister got an orange one, my brother got a blue one, and I got my favorite color, green. And eventually we got tired of shooting at targets down on the ground in the snow in our backyard. So we started shooting the arrows in more of an arc, going for height and distance. And we pretended that we were the arrows, and we were flying through the sky. And then we would come back down to the ground and sink into the frozen ground. If you've never seen an arrow go straight up into the air, you're probably pretty smart. But let me tell you, it's pretty incredible. It goes something like this. You shoot the arrow up, and it flies straight up into the face of gravity. And it goes higher and higher, 30, 40 feet up into the air. And then it does something magical. It stalls out into the sky. It freezes. It just hangs up there for a few seconds, like it's just checking out the view. And then gravity sends it back down. It slowly rights itself, and it comes straight back down and goes straight into the ground. In the springtime, when the warm breezes came in, the stiffness and the brittle of the long, harsh winter had started wearing off my bow, and it became more flexible, a lot like the old people's bones and joints in our town. And by the first day of summer, my friends Donnie, Pooter, and Scotty, and Tommy, and I entered Haymarket Square with our arms linked, and I had my bow and the last surviving arrow. We each took turns firing arrows straight up into the sky. And then my friend Donnie picked up the bow and changed everything. Donnie was stronger than the average kid. He had a cop mustache when he was only 10 years old. All of his 8 brothers all had cop mustaches. When I spent the night at his house, it was like sleeping over at the police academy. Donnie pulled the bowstring back further than I'd ever seen it go back. He pulled it back so far that the tips of the bow actually touched each other. And then he let go. And the arrow shot straight up in the sky faster than I'd ever seen it go. And then it just disappeared into the clear blue bicentennial sky. And even though we couldn't see it anymore, we knew that it was still going up. And after a few seconds, we kind of figured it was stalling out up there, frozen in the sky, just hanging there. And now, if the arrow had eyes, it would have an amazing view of our town. Looking east, you could see all the town's features and landmarks neatly laid out along the riverbank. And about 2 miles to the east, just past the city limits, it could see a 4-story red brick building that housed the staff of the Dixon State School. Now, this was the largest mental institution in the country, and it was surrounded by neat rows of red brick bungalow houses that housed all the patients, or kids, as the town folk lovingly called them. It had gone by many names. It was currently called the Snake Pit because it housed 5,200 patients in a space that was originally intended for about half that many. On the south side of the riverbank, the arrow could see a cement plant, and a lot of people traveled by boat back then. So if you floated from there back towards where the park was, where the arrow and my friends were currently frozen, you would pass nice big boat docks that were connected to sturdy steps that climbed a steep riverbank where there were beautiful stone houses and neatly manicured lawns. And you could keep floating west, and then you could dock your boat above the dam, and you could go into town and have a drink at the 621 Club or one of the many other bars, or you could go into the Roaring Twenties restaurant and have a nice meal. Now, this was a true river town, full of rich stories about colorful characters that were named after fish. Catfish O'Neill, Walleye Jim, and Little Carpy Jimmy. Below the dam, the water flowed west under 2 bridges, past a huge castle-like structure that was our high school, and then under a really tall train bridge that was the gateway to the west end. Now, from the arrow's vantage point, the town looked tapered like a long turd. On the west end, the houses were smaller, the yards were smaller, the grass grew very unruly up alongside abandoned cars and abandoned boats in side yards. And my neighbors couldn't afford to have trash pickup, so they just burned their trash in the yard. And there were no streetlights. So the air beneath the arrow at night was usually full of choking black smoke that smelled like garbage, mixed in with the danky smell of the Rock River. Back in the park, where the arrow and my friends were frozen, we stood there while the arrow, it started coming down. At that point, we finally realized we were in danger. And at that point, it was every boy for himself, and we all scattered, except Donnie. Donnie had this crazy idea that the wind was caused by the trees. So he instinctively looked to the eastern border of the park, and sure enough, the walnut trees were really blowing the wind strong to the west. Donnie figured the wind was going to carry that arrow, so he stayed right where he was at. But just to be safe, he licked his finger and put it in the air, and then he nodded his head. But Pooter had his own idea. Pooter, he booked it. He dove under the nearest picnic table, but the picnic table had 1-inch openings in the green slats on the picnic table, so Pooter wasn't totally out of danger. That left me and Scotty and Tommy. Now, I was never the fastest kid in my class, and I always wanted to beat Scotty and Tommy in a race. I just figured all I needed was some motivation. And that's when I heard Donnie yelling my name. Not Scotty's or Tommy's, but my name. Run, McConnell. Run, McConnell! But my legs felt like lead, and I just couldn't get going. I felt like I was in a dream, and I just watched Scotty and Tommy pull away. And I could hear Donnie still yelling, "Run, McConnell! Run, McConnell!" Now, of all the McConnells in my family, I was not the fastest. My sister, now she was the fast one. She used to help my brother Mike with his paper route. So she carried all the newspapers and ran door to door. So she had really strong legs. My brother Mike was a track star on the varsity track team in high school. So my sister figured, hey, I'm going to join the track team. The only problem was the Lincoln grade school did not have a girls' track team in 7th and 8th grade. So she decided she was going to run with the boys' track team. But Coach Jennings told her, you can't run with the boys because there's no girls allowed. So she ran home crying to my parents. Now, my mom had just gotten divorced from my dad, and she had just remarried a guy named Johnny the Kingfish. When Johnny the Kingfish heard this, his blood started to boil. He told my sister Kelly that the coach could not stop her from running with the boys, that it was against the law. And he sent her right back down to tell the coach to let her on the team. And the coach said, look, I told you, you cannot join the boys' team. My sister said, hey, my dad said it's illegal. You have to let me join. You have to let me run with the boys. And the coach was like, well, yeah, well, who's your dad? And she said, Johnny the Kingfish. He quickly had a change of heart and said, well, yeah, you can join the track team. The Kingfish, he was at the top of the chain when it came to fish, river fish. So the very first race that she had was against Andy Evett. He was the center of the basketball team on the varsity basketball team at Lincoln School. And my sister was only 4'10", and she couldn't even fit into a size 1 track shoe. So at the start of the race, my sister had to take 4 steps to every 2 steps that Andy Evett took. And when they came around the final turn, they were neck and neck. And the Kingfish and my mom were on the other side of the fence. And the Kingfish looked like Jesus. He had long, wild hair and a flowing beard. And he was fired up. And he was yelling at the top of his lungs, "Run, goddammit, run! Run, goddammit!" And my sister heard that, and she really poured it on. And she crossed the finish line first. And the Kingfish was over the moon. The Kingfish found a new religion on the spot. He became Kelly's personal trainer and coach. And he used to take us out running every morning at 6 a.m. He'd drive out on a deserted country road and drop my sister Kelly off, drive a quarter mile, drop my brother Chris off, drive another quarter mile and drop me off, and then we would all race to his car. And the winner got a silver dollar. And it was always a close race. Now, I usually won. But with all that delivering the newspapers and all that extra training, chasing the Kingfish's Ford Granada, my sister got even faster. She kept winning against all the boys. She never lost. She was pretty much undefeated. There was even a small article in the local newspaper about this little girl who was beating all the boys. And it actually got picked up by the wire service. So it was in the Rockford newspaper, and it was even in the Chicago Tribune. Now, that couldn't have made the Kingfish happier. You know, back at the 621 Club, I think a lot of the guys there at the bar got really tired of the Kingfish bragging about how fast his daughter was and what a great coach he was and how fast the Kingfish was. So there was an argument at the bar, and then there was a classic bar bet. The Kingfish got challenged to a 1-mile race by largemouth Donnie Lambert. It was going to be a 1-mile race, and the winner was going to get a steak and lobster dinner paid for by the loser. Now, Donnie Lambert's girlfriend, she really wanted that lobster. And she used to yell at him in front of all of his friends. "You better win that race, you son of a bitch. I want that lobster." And there were a lot of side bets at the 621 Club. And the odds were currently 6-1 against the Kingfish because largemouth Lambert happened to be a track star from high school. But he had spent the last 20 years at the end of the bar. And when you looked at him, you could tell. And about that time, a lot of the publicity about my sister had kind of died down. And it was 1 week before the race, and the Kingfish put a half-page ad in the newspaper. Race of the century. The Kingfish versus largemouth Lambert. The winner. Steak and lobster at the Roaring Twenties restaurant, paid for by the loser. So on the day of the race, half the town showed up, and they were lined up on both sides of the street. About an hour before the race, the kingfish secretly ate a handful of acid. And there he stood in the middle of the road on the starting line. His eyes were as large as saucers. And when my Uncle Richie pulled the trigger on the starting gun, the kingfish got startled. He thought someone was shooting at him. And believe me, it wasn't the first time. He took off at a full sprint, and he sprinted the entire mile. He didn't even stop at the finish line. He sprinted all the way back to the 621 Club, and it was empty. He walked in and ordered a beer, and Charlie, the bartender, said, "Who won the race, Kingfish?" And all the Kingfish could say was, "What race?" After that, the Kingfish was even more of a legend. And a lot of people tried to challenge him to a race, but the Kingfish was pretty smart. He always told everyone, "Hey, I'm retired." And he went out on top. And in all that glory, just all the people in town on the side of the road yelling his name, "Run, Kingfish! Run, Kingfish!" Now, back in the park, Scotty and Tommy had made it safely out of the park, and they were standing across the street. And Pooter must have crawled off from underneath the picnic table, and he must have been standing there with Donnie. I couldn't tell because I was running, and I could see Scotty and Tommy. They were yelling. I couldn't hear what they were saying, but I could see their lips moving because I felt like I was in a dream, and everything was going in slow motion. And I could see Scotty and Tommy, and they were just over there going. All I could hear was the arrow coming down. And I was running as fast as I could, and all I could think about was, damn, I wish I was as fast as Scotty and Tommy. Why couldn't I be as fast as my sister Kelly? And I remembered how fast the Kingfish ran that day, and I was like, man, if I could only be as fast as the Kingfish, if I could just get out of this park, I could live to see another day. But my legs at this point were so heavy, and everything was going in slow motion. I was running as fast as I could, but and all I could hear was the arrow getting closer and closer. And at the very last minute, I was thinking, if I could just squeeze out a few more feet, a few more inches. So at the last second, I dove headfirst into the deep grass. And I remember staring down at a little red ant. And it was cruising across a blade of bent grass. And when I looked up, my forehead smashed against the arrow's shaft. And everything turned red, and I knew I was dead. But my friends, they got me back up on my feet. They walked me around a little bit, and I couldn't hear anything. Everything was red. And they grabbed me by the shoulders, and they were shaking me. And I couldn't hear what they were saying, but I could read their lips. And they were saying, "You just got death with a cheat. You just got death with a cheat. Death with a cheat." So they walked me around for a little bit, and I finally came out of shock. And I just couldn't believe the arrow was in front of me. And I didn't have to be as fast as Scotty and Tommy, or my sister, or the Kingfish. And they finally, they walked me around for a little bit, and I finally came out of shock, and they put their arms around me, only the way little boys can do to each other, and they walked me out of the park. And then Scotty ran back and tried to pull the arrow out of the ground, but he couldn't. It was in there so deep. So Tommy ran back and helped him pull the arrow out. And then we all just walked out. They walked me the rest of the way out of the park. And then I just realized a really valuable lesson that day, that I didn't have to be as fast as Kelly or Donnie, Tommy, Scotty, or the kingfish. I realized that the speed that I travel is always going to be the perfect pace. Thank you.